How do you understand the constraints that underpin women's limited participation within the labor market today? How does technology hold any prospect of supporting women's transition from unemployment into dignified and fulfilling work? How do women's lived experiences inform their perception about the workplace, and how does this shape their employment choices? What do we know about what works that can improve the employment outcomes for women? What else and what more can be done to improve the conditions and processes that produce work opportunities for young women? So these are questions that informed the framework of this research.
The barriers that underpins women's labor market participation in Nigeria is probably better understood now than it was about a decade ago. But emerging insights suggest that there are significant gaps in how we understand how these barriers frustrate women's economic outcome.
Since 2010, we have observed a decline of women's representation in Nigeria's labor market. All right, as of 2010, it was just slightly below 60%, but currently we have barely less than 50% of Nigeria's labor market having women as participants within it. And this calls for concerns because it means that if women are not participating in the labor market, or the rate at which they're participating is reducing, it means that they're either personal or they're structural or they're institutional barriers that is preventing them from engaging within this sector and expressing their economic dividends to the country. These barriers have been classified into 3 buckets using a framework of 3 concentric circles.
The first and internal circle actually speaks to the personal barriers, and it's largely under the woman's control. The second is largely out of her control, but within her influence, and this speaks to the organizational or family barriers.
And the third circle, which is under the policy and cultural bucket, is largely out of her control or influence, but it has a huge impact on her labor market outcomes.
Okay, emerging insight from this research suggests that it is very crucial to take cognizance of the fact that women have the agency to make decisions, especially because there are different situations that women could be confronted with, and their response to these situations differ based on their own personal preferences, values, and aspirations. Although several studies have exemplified the complexities around the cognitive process of preference formation, and the extent to which personality shapes women's labor market outcome might not be largely instructive, but it is very important to recognize that women have the agency to make decisions based on how they perceive these barriers and how best they think they can juggle multiple priorities.
Never first child, I actually left a consulting job I really loved, simply because the pace and the nature of the work just no longer suited me and my newborn, right? So I took a really prolonged leave, maybe about 7 months, so only until my son was 1 year old I get into the world of work again. And even then I was very deliberate. So this is the transition for me to get into Rome, right? I was very deliberate about it to say, I'm looking for a job that allows me flexible hours, that can give me time off on Friday afternoons for immunization, that is not travel heavy, that has relatively normal working hours, all the things I didn't have before, but that I needed for this new phase. It didn't hold me back. I think it changed my role, definitely, but it's not that because of that decision I took steps back in my career, I wasn't able to progress as far. I just had to think critically and have an honest conversation with myself around, in this season of my life, what suits me the most, and then work towards that.
For me, I've never seen being a woman as being a curse. I think I'm very comfortable in my own skin. I've realized that in life, whether you're male or female, if you want to achieve anything, you must be a focused person, you must be a go-getter, you must have your clear goals, and you must be bold and courageous enough to pursue them.
Being a woman has never been a barrier for me in choosing what I want to become or what I want to do. So it's left for you to choose what do you really want to do and just go for it.
I have kind of unconsciously built this need to prove myself as a female, that I can do whatever I want to do and become who I want to become if I set my mind to it.
Unlike personal barriers, for institutional barriers, women are willing and able to engage with specific sectors or take on specific jobs and also deliver value in their area of interest. But the odds are usually against them, either because there is an organizational preference for a man. And these factors include, but are not limited to, marriage, domestic responsibilities, sexual harassment, recruitment policies, culture and environment.
Women believe that the workforce has not been structured in a way that is friendly to women. They feel the involvement of women in the workforce is more like an afterthought. Women were not in the original plan.
In Kano, actually, women face a lot of challenges because of maybe family, traditional and societal changes they go through. Like now, if a woman is married, she's supposed to just be at home. Like the tradition is saying that the people in the society are saying like you should just be at home, take care of your kids, leave the work for the men, because they think that when they start working, their husbands will get another wife, or their husbands will divorce them, or their family members would not approve of it. Most especially families that are not educated.
Like as a Muslim woman, there are some jobs that one should say, oh, I want to do this job, and the next thing, have you forgotten you're a woman? Have you forgotten you're a northern woman? Have you forgotten you're a Muslim? And it just kind of limits you to what you want to do. And the next thing is, this work is for men. When I and you just, like I said, most times you might want to go for it, but indirectly, the energy you get from people around you kind of turns you off, and you don't just, like, you're not motivated to want to go for the job.
A lot of organizations today don't even have policies in place to protect the rights of women against sexual harassment. This mentality of you need to use what you have to get what you want is still rampant. It's still valid in the workplace. So a lot of women don't feel safe to even want to delve into the formal employment.
I believe that corporate businesses, we can do better with regards to setting up interactive women networks, and this should be partly driven by our HR departments. And these networks are not just being established to create policies that would, help with combating issues like harassment, but should be safe spaces where female employees are able to express themselves and report cases. And these cases should not just be reported, but there should be like some kind of panel that would address the situation and, provide consequences for the predators.
There are general organizational policies for general reasons, but if we want to speak to women specifically, we need to speak to women-specific issues. We know that as women grow in their career, they tend to want to have a career and also have children. How do organizations accommodate the need to spend time at home and with their kids? Because, fathers have to do this as well, and also be enabled at work. We have a lot of women who are very productive, but would need to work flexi hours.
See, considering women's participation in the labor market from a formal and informal perspective, there's an assumption that women are largely playing in the informal space because that's their space of interest. But looking at the statistics of women that we interacted with during the research, 51% of women are interested in participating in the informal work across the 3 states. And just about 17% are interested in self-employment, and just 12% of them are interested in entrepreneurship. And this shows that the low representation of women in the formal sector is not primarily because women are not interested in working in that space, but because maybe the structures or the systems that define formality in Nigeria is a barrier that frustrates their access to formal employment. And beyond the gaps in education and skills, which remain a significant barrier to formal employment, a common feedback from our interviews further posit that more women are moving into the informal sector due to the unfavorable structural conditions and marginalizations created by patriarchy. Women are creatively redefining work in ways that reinforce their identity, values, talent, and skills.
I would say that the growing statistics of women in the informal sector can be largely attributed to the cumbersome process of documentation with regards to specific things like, running or owning a business. Now, what happens when a woman is unable to go through that whole process? Her short-term goal is to make money, right? And so maybe operating as a business name, sole proprietor, or even just a petty trader is sufficient for her at that time, as opposed to going through that cumbersome documentation process. Although cumbersome, we all know that this is necessary.
Another trend that affects women is, of course, marital trends. You see, women get married, and again, in our culture, where there's a lot of tradition, cultural and religious biases, you find out that a lot of women are subjected to either being housewives or staying at home, and then when they face situations where their husbands die or they end up separating with their husbands, they are back to square one. They have absolutely no source of income and nothing to do. So that also sort of pushes them into the informal sector. And we know that poverty, being one of the strongest of all the three, is also another reason that you find a lot of people in the informal sector just doing all manner of things. So for me, those are the kinds of things that push a lot of youth, a lot of women, because again, when you look at the population of even the SMEs and those in the informal sector, a greater percentage, about 43% of them are women.
If you talk about the entrepreneurship space, which I can speak on, you find, to my earlier reference around the micro businesses, you find a lot of women playing in the micro business. So whether it's in trade, it's in retail, it's in services at the very small level, or even looking at things like hospitality, so running food retail businesses, or even in the segments of the agricultural value chain, in education businesses, we're also seeing women play a large role in that.
For instance, according to the African report, Sabi, a fintech startup in 2021, already achieved a milestone of over 150 merchants who recorded $1.2 billion in sales on its platform. So this already shows that a lot of things are happening within the informal space, and that would really be a way to support women and ensure that they thrive and they serve as contributors to the economy of Nigeria. More sustainably is the importance of improving the structures that limit women's participation within the labor market beyond tokenism. I know there's a quick fix of giving quota systems to women within the workplace just to ensure that there's representation. But that suggests that women are not competitive, which this research already debunks.
Policies. I say policies because policies need to be implemented. People should be held accountable. There should be consequences for the non-adherence to policies.
I would really like to see initiatives that will lead to sustainable impact, initiatives that would lead to positive ripple effects.
We need to have policies in organizations that are friendly for both the male and the female sex. So let's take a look at policies like the gender policy, whereby it doesn't matter which sex you are, so you are entitled to all the benefits in the organization.
I think the point again is to first of all make sure that there's a clear understanding of the issues and the challenges that we have within the workspace that are limiting women in the employability space or in the labor market. If we do not have an understanding of the issues, whatever we design as men and or as women is going to be faulty.
Because if you think about the trajectory of women in the workforce, a lot of times you say at entry level it's 50-50, but by the time you get to leadership, it's more like 20-80 tilted towards males, right? And along the way, some have either stagnated in their careers or they've dropped out of the workforce completely because of childbearing and family obligations. But there's never been a concerted effort to call them back. And my hypothesis is that if we do try to call them back collectively, they will come back.
I'll commend the efforts of corporate organizations for, first of all, acknowledging, that there's a women's problem. I know every March there are the social media campaigns with all kinds of, posts and videos just celebrating women. But I think we need to move beyond that and get to a point where organizations are now publishing their numbers, showing year on year the type of progress they've made in terms of policies, in terms of women within the organization across, from graduate trainee to management level.
If we want to take up any programs, the questions we should begin to ask is, how does it affect men differently and how does it affect women differently?
We can have policies in place, and not only having the policies, but implementing the policies. That efforts that supporting the policies to be implemented around the state so that they will have the enabling environment to do the needful.
If you eliminate entirely victim blaming, especially in sexual harassment issues, that would empower women to be able to point out areas where, for instance, companies can improve, especially on sexual harassment issues. If you create a very safe environment for the woman to thrive in your company, trust me, they will come and they will thrive and they will help you develop your business.
The reasons why women are not gaining the visibility that they require and deserve within the workspace is not because they are not competitive, but because there are structural limitations. And it will be very important that the policies address these issues from a structural perspective rather than leveraging primitive approaches to address these issues.
So just as we have tried to understand the barriers that affect women's labor market outcomes using the framework of 3 concentric circles, the recommendations are also analyzed using these 3 buckets. So starting from policy or cultural change, we perceive that transforming women's labor market outcome is actually hinged on improved policies and culture that supports women's rights and participation in the labor market. We need interventions and initiatives that focus on dismantling patriarchal systems masked in culture and tradition, and also policies that secure the education of the girl child. Also enacting protective labor laws focused on women. All this would be pivotal to shifting ideologies and shaping the structures that improves women's labor market outcomes in sustainable ways. And so trickling down from policy or cultural change to family and organizational change, we also need friendly social systems and workspaces that allow women transition and reach their full potential, so that women can also be empowered in their minds and in their skills, so that they're self-confident and they're able to compete favorably in a dynamic global environment.